Well, hey everybody, we are so excited that you're here today as we are kicking off a brand new series today. And this is one of those series that's really a write things down, don't forget it kind of series. But before we start, I want to play a quick game with you. And how we're going to introduce this series is by sharing kind of a string of scenarios and asking you to vote on whether or not you think these particular things are red flags or not. Now, you've all heard the term red flag before, probably. And basically a red flag is a warning or kind of, it's a warning sign about some of the qualities or habits that you see in another person. It's the stuff that when you see it kind of makes you go, whoa, I really don't know that I can handle that or deal with that. That really feels like a red flag to me. And so what I want you to do right now is I want you just to take a few seconds and I want you to think about what you would say are some of the biggest red flags that you've ever seen in another person. What are some of the biggest red flags that you've ever seen in another person? And so to help us get started today, I'm going to share some statements. And if you think that these particular statements are a red flag, I want you to kind of note that in some way, whether you raise your hand or maybe, you have a red flag and you wave it, or maybe, you make a note somewhere or do a little tally mark, whatever it is. But what I want you to do is I want you to think about these particular things and tell us whether or not you think they're a red flag or not. So here we go. First one, they touch people with their feet. Is that a red flag or not? Or what about they like pineapple on their pizza? Is that a red flag? Or maybe they eat ketchup on their eggs. Is that a red flag or not? Or what about this one that would be a big red flag in our household? They don't like Chick-fil-A. Or what about they wear sneakers with no socks? Is that a red flag? Or they have no social media. Is that a red flag or not? Or what about they use a million emojis when it comes to their text messages? Is that a red flag? Or maybe they wear sunglasses indoors that are not prescription. Now, as you hear that list of things, here's the deal, is some of those things are immediately a red flag for me. And maybe they are for you as well. But when we think about it, most of the things on that list are just a silly red flag. They're things that are just kind of comical to us. But what about the bigger ones? What about the ones that either make or break a relationship? Or what about the ones that show us whether or not we can expect respect from somebody else? Those are critical things that we need to know. And those can help us determine what's best for us, what's best for others, and what God wants for us, specifically when it comes to the topics that we're going to talk about over these next 4 weeks, which are the topics of sex and relationships. Now, over these next 4 weeks, we're going to dive in and talk about this topic a lot as we go through this series called Red Flags, Respect, and Relationships. Now, this series is specifically designed to help us navigate the topics of sex and relationships in a way that honors God, honors others, and also honors ourselves. And so we're going to talk about all of these different red flags that we want to be aware of, these things that we need to notice, these things that we want to avoid, these things that, help us understand the respect that we also should give and receive, and the relationships that we want to have with the people who care about us and who support us. So yeah, in case you're just sitting there and you're kind of on overload right now, that's what we're going to talk about over these next few weeks. And I hope you'll choose to stick with us throughout this series, because believe it or not, I think church is one of the best places to talk about things like red flags, respect, and relationships. Now, throughout this series, we're going to use a lot of different terminology. And as we do this, we're going to start off today by talking about sexual desires. And here's what I mean by that, is that the word desire means a strong feeling of wanting to have something or do something. Here you see, that's what a desire is it means a strong feeling of wanting to have something or do something. And when we talk about this, it's also important to note that we're going to not just talk about desire, but we're going to talk about sexual desires. And when it comes to sexual desires, we're talking about the sexual things that we feel, think about, or want to do. So in other words, let me give you a few examples here. That when you think somebody is really cute and you get that nervous feeling, in the pit of your stomach when you talk to them, that's what we're going to talk about. Or when you decide to send a person a DM or a snap, we're going to talk about that. When you decide to hold hands, kiss, or be close to the person that you're dating or that maybe you have a crush on, we're going to talk about that. And the list could go on, because all that stuff, those are desires that you may have as a middle schooler or even as you get older in life. And in fact, here's the deal. Those kinds of desires, they're normal and they're natural. God actually gave us the ability to experience attraction and desire. And if you hear me say nothing else today, hear this. Your desires in and of themselves are not bad. The fact that you're curious about things or interested in things like sex and relationships, that's not bad. It's not something that we should be embarrassed about or awkward about, because it's something that we were all designed to experience. But the problem comes when we're not sure how to respond to those desires. When we don't know how to talk about them or what to do with them or what's actually good for us when it comes to the things that we talk about in regards to our desires. That's when things get really tricky. But trust me, there is an answer here. There's a specific plan that God Himself has created for us when it comes to our sexual desires. There's a plan for us to help us choose what's best for us and also what's best for other people. A plan that will help us avoid things like the red flags and instead choose respect when it comes to our relationships. Now, a long time ago, people who really loved God, they wrote down all kinds of stuff about the topics of sex and relationships and desires that can help us today. And that's where we're going to start. So today we're going to look at some advice about sexual desires that were written in the Bible by a really important guy named Paul. Now, we've talked about Paul in other videos before, but Paul wrote a lot of books in the New Testament, which is a part of the Bible that talks about what happened during and after the time that Jesus spent on earth. Now, we call these books, we call them books, but they're actually letters that Paul wrote to help Christians in the first century understand how to live and follow Jesus together. Now, the specific letter that we're going to look at today is written to a group of Jesus followers in Rome. And Paul was really good at helping people see what mattered to God and the reality that what mattered to God should matter to them and affect them as a result. Now, the people who were making up this faith community in Rome that Paul was writing to definitely needed to hear what Paul had to say. And honestly, I think all of us today do as well. Because Paul's words can do a lot for us in a conversation about our God-given desires. So let's take a look at this passage today from Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. It says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will." Now, there's a whole lot in those two verses that we just read. So let's kind of break it down. Because Paul starts by talking about who God is. And who God is God is somebody who offers mercy. And you may say, okay, well, how do you define mercy? Well, mercy means getting compassion and kindness when you don't deserve it. So when your coach doesn't make you run extra laps, even though you were late to practice, that's showing you mercy and not punishing you for your actions. Now, because we're all human, we mess up sometimes. That's a natural reality. And we all make decisions that don't line up with God's best for us. That's what we call sin. And because sin separates us from God, God showed us mercy by sending Jesus to save us and make a path for us to be in a right relationship with God again. And in case you're wondering, that is a big deal because it's a sign that demonstrates God's love for us. It's a sign that we can trust that God cares about us and wants what's best for us. And we can respond to what God has done for us by living the way that God called us to live in all areas of our lives, including the topics of sex and relationships. You could say it this way, that God cares about what we do with our desires. God cares about what we do with our desires. And so that means when it comes to things like your sexual desires, we need to choose to respond with another term we're going to use throughout this series, which is sexual integrity. And sexual integrity simply means this: choosing to respond to the sexual things that we feel, think, and desire in a way that respects ourselves, others, and God. Let me just say that again. We're going to talk about this idea of sexual integrity, which is choosing to respond to the sexual things we feel, think, and desire in a way that respects ourselves, others, and God. Now, Paul explained that we should feel and we should respond to our sexual desires in a way that's pleasing to God. It's not that we're supposed to get rid of them or we're supposed to ignore them entirely. He doesn't say that. But he does say that we should respond to our desires in a way that is good, pleasing, and honorable to God, to ourselves, and to others. That's what sexual integrity is all about. Now, here's the thing. Maybe for some of you today, you hear that and you say, okay, that sounds great. Like, respond to my desires in a way that's honoring and pleasing to God. Makes sense. Honor God with my desires. Yeah, I can do that. Choose sexual integrity? Sure, no problem. But is that really at the heart of the issue? Because it's one thing to read verses like this and to hear messages about God's good plan for our desires, but it's another to actually know what that's like and to live it out every single day. Let me give you a few examples, because when we find ourselves curious to watch that YouTube video, or maybe we're interested in the new kid at school, or maybe we want to send a picture that we know we shouldn't send on Snap, then what do? How do we actually respond to those desires in a way that honors God? Well, we look back at the last part of what Paul said here. Because in Romans 12:2, he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So we can start by changing or renewing our minds. Now, the idea here, the idea of renewing your mind, means to see things from a new or different perspective. To see things from a new or different perspective. So we can ask God, God, can you help change the way that I see the plan for my desires? Can you help me see my sexual desires through the lens that you see them through? Can you help me pray for guidance that can help me understand and impact my life and the lives of others? Can you help by giving me wisdom to see what your desires really are and what your plan is, God, for my sexual desires? You see, when we do this, we'll be able to see where we're operating with integrity and where we might be kind of venturing into that red flag territory that we talked about earlier. You see, we'll be able to see where our sexual integrity is respected in a relationship and where it's not. And we'll be able to choose and respond to desires with a sexual integrity that God calls us to. And why do we do this? Because God cares about what we do with our desires. So to help us know what this actually looks like in our lives, we're going to break this down. And we'll identify some red flags to look for when it comes to our desires. We're going to point out what the type of respect that we should practice towards ourselves and towards other people. And we're going to think about how we can use that in our relationships with trusted adults to gain wisdom and guidance when it comes to our desires. So here's what I mean. Let's start with the red flags. The red flags, we simply need to start by noticing them. You see, God's design for sex is within the context of a marriage between a man and a woman, and that should honor yourself and honor others and honor God. So now that you know that God has a plan when it comes to your desires, you can start by paying more attention to and notice those things that push you towards something else. And if you notice a response to your desires that doesn't line up with sexual integrity, that can be a red flag. So your red flags, you start by noticing them. With respect, you set a new standard for sexual integrity. So right now, you have a chance to set a standard for how you're going to respond to your desires. It's how you act, what you look at, what you think, and how you talk about things. You can decide in those moments to have sexual integrity. And you can decide to respect yourself and you can decide to respect other people. Now, maybe you've made some decisions that haven't honored God with your desires. Or maybe you've even found yourself in situations that you didn't expect or ask for. And the good news is, no matter what we've chosen or dealt with in the past, God loves us, cares about us, and isn't judging us. So we need to choose today to begin to live our lives with sexual integrity. And then the third piece of this is to talk about our relationships. That we need to share relationships with the right people. So no matter how awkward it may feel to talk about the sexual desires you have, you can choose to talk with wise, trusted people in your life. These are people that can help you set healthy boundaries and help be in a safe place when you have struggles, to help process those or questions that you have about all of this stuff. Your small group leaders are a great place to start. And they're not an expert on the topic, but I promise you they have more wisdom and insight than you think. And besides that, they love you, they care about you, and they want what's best for you. Because remember, God cares about us, and God cares about what we do with our desires. And so that's why I hope that you'll choose to respond to yours with sexual integrity. As we wrap up this first introductory piece of this series, I understand there may be some of you that are watching this today and you feel like that choice of choosing sexual integrity has been taken from you. Maybe you've experienced sexual abuse or maybe harassment. And if that's you, I just want you to know we're sorry for what you've dealt with. What happened to you is not your fault. And what's been done to you, or it doesn't impact your sexual integrity. It doesn't change your ability to honor yourself, to honor others, and to honor God. And if that's something you're dealing with today, we encourage you to talk to a trusted adult. Maybe it's a parent or a family member or a small group leader or even a counselor, because we want to help you get the help and support that you deserve. Because when it comes to red flags, respect, and relationships, we want you to feel safe to talk about all of it with us. It's one of the reasons that we have small groups when we gather in person, is to connect you with other people that you can trust, who can encourage you to honor God and others with your life. So as we wrap up today, I want you to think about this question. What's one way you can respond to your desires with sexual integrity? What's one way you can respond to your desires with sexual integrity? Well, thank you so much for checking out the first installment of this series, Red Flags, Respect, and Relationships. As we continue down this journey over the next few weeks, we're going to unpack a lot of things regarding the topic of sex and relationships. We're specifically going to look at red flags, respect, and relationships throughout this series to help you understand that you need to look out for the red flags, that you need to start respecting yourself, others, and God, and seeing how that impacts your relationships. So we hope you'll join us, whether it's here in person. Again, we meet from 6 to 8 p.m. on Sunday evenings in the youth room at New Hope Church. We'd love to have you join us in person and get connected to a small group, or whether you just continue to check out these videos. Whatever it is, we hope that these are helpful for you. Have a great and wonderful rest of your day and an amazing week.